takes place in the city of Chicago. This isn't connected to anything. I don't have to worry. I'm just gonna
No, you're good.
I'm going to make clicking noises
Loud
the
clicking
entire
noises
time.
the whole time.
Good.
We're live.
Oh, nice.
We're not live because we're not.
Nice. We're just going to
live.
edit it to wherever we need to start it. Nice.
Hi, the internet. For a change of pace, we decided we'd sit on this couch together. We're in this tiny pink box.
Don't be confused. It's not City of Mist.
No.
But come back for that because it's great.
We'll be here. So Jeff and I got into what I'd say is a conversation because we weren't mad.
It's a healthy argument.
Yeah, it was constructive. It was constructive. And we were trying to pin down exactly what qualifies certain genres. We got real...
Within specific to video games. We're not doing movies or whatever. But we'll probably draw on those.
Yeah, they're good things to talk about.
Sure.
But the whole crux of the argument is, like, how do we class down and identify exactly when we know we're playing a game? Because, like, I don't know if you're familiar with the definition for pornography. There's some famous court case where they were saying, I can't tell you exactly what qualifies as art and what qualifies as porn, but I know it when I see it. And I think we can do him one better. But we're not going to talk about porn. Talking about video games.
Leave that to your own... You can come up with your own genre classifications of porn. You'll be fine.
Adept.
I
don't want to typecast you guys like that. But so we decided the easiest way for us to do this would be to get together, sit down on a couch, rather than just texting about it for hours and
text doesn't make for good video or audio.
No, I could sit here and scroll through on my phone.
Send you the text log. It'd be great.
You guys wouldn't like that.
Probably not.
So that said, our goal is we're gonna start with a specific genre of video game.
Right.
We're gonna say what it is, the genre, and then we're gonna do our best to narrow it down.
See where it comes from. See where it goes. See what subgenres of that are, or whether or not it itself is a
genre or a subgenre, and like what aspects qualify it, and why certain things are and certain things aren't.
Right.
Because again, we can tell it whenever we see it, but there's no cut and dry. This is what it is. And
exactly.
If you guys couldn't tell, I have to angle it correctly. We're doing the survival horror as our first genre break for this. So ideally, it's a series.
It's October. It's a spooky month.
Spookings be upon us all.
Right.
And
and also with you.
Thanks, Jeff. Let us... So we're gonna talk about what exactly qualifies a survival horror.
Right.
Because I can tell you with reasonable accuracy when I'm playing one. Because I'm usually spooked or know I'm supposed to be spooked.
Right. And if you've seen some of our other videos, we've played some survival horror
That's
games.
true. So if you want to watch us play Resident Evil.
Yep, the remake. The
remake, yeah. Mm-hmm. We started Resident Evil 0. We're going to keep that up.
We finished...
Dino Crises 1 and 2.
Yep. Also, Evil Within.
That is true. Game. If you want to see the ending to Evil Within, the first one, not the second one. We got you, man. So we'll start there, I guess. Yep. Not to talk your ear off, but I guess that's what you came here for, right?
Welcome.
Hey. So I've got a pencil and paper.
He's ready.
I'm taking notes. We've got
survival horror. And we already discussed some examples of survival horror, which...
via text message, so don't worry. We'll bring you up.
We also discussed them here. So, like, Resident Evil we've played, and Dino Crisis. I would say...
Dino Crisis 1 at the very least.
Is a survival horror.
At the very least.
Yes.
And we'll come back to why 2 might not be.
Right. Seems fair.
What is a survival horror, IYO, in your opinion? what makes a survival horror?
Thank you for translating. Okay, so certain elements that I associate with survival horror include horror, which I guess probably needs to be better defined than just saying like horror.
Yeah, you can't use the word in the definition.
Right.
That's not fair.
A situation or something that is horrific, I would say, as you either go into different territories. So like sense of oppression, sense of being underpowered or weak, or sense of foreboding or dread are all things that sort of lend themselves to horror, both in movies as well as in games. And because you get into different flavors of horror pretty quickly if you go through like movies
Yeah.
and stuff, because you could have like something
Your
that's
slasher fix,
Right.
your alien,
Some-
your creature features,
right creature features, something that's gory, something that's
psychological horror.
psychological horror, something that's existentially horrific.
Okay.
When we get into some things that are like H.P. Lovecraft and stuff
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
like existential
unknown.
horror. Yeah.
Yeah.
They call it Lovecraftian horror. What's the word that we use?
Cthulhu.
No,
Tentacle face.
tentacle face horror. That's the word I was trying to think of. Thank you, Jeff.
No problem.
So I've got a game that uses foreboding and dread.
Ooh, nice. I like those things.
Yeah.
So that would be sort of like atmosphere in terms of mechanics that are typically associated with that. We talked a little bit about item management, and I don't know if that's something that is inherent to a horror game, or if that's just something that, like Resident Evil and a lot of the things that are like Resident Evil, so Dino Crisis 1 for sure.
Yeah. Because you couldn't just go to a computer and fill up your gun.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So I guess maybe item management isn't the best way of saying that, but that's like
I've got whose mechanics reflect.
Okay. I would say the aspects of item management that reflect on horror or survival would be dwindling resources, or like the choice between two resources in terms of how they'll affect your longevity.
So,
I guess,
like-
within the world,
Like scarcity.
scarcity of resources is typically there, because like in the Resident Evil series and series that are like it, you have situations where you'll come across, do I want this health or do I want this ammo?
And you have to move from one physical location to another physical location
Right.
with a limited number of item slots. And you
Right.
say, do I want to have bullets or do I want to not die?
Right. Do I think I'm going to run into a bunch of zombies up here and they're going to bite off my face, and so I want to heal up, or can I avoid having my face bitten off by shooting them in their face prior to them biting me?
Okay. And this isn't exactly reflected in the definition, I would say, but I think that's part of what makes running through hallways in Resident Evil scary.
Yeah, I think that's like the survival portion of it. That you've got a certain, like a limited set of tools to try and make your way through a hostile environment.
Okay.
Would be sort of where I'd think to go with that.
Okay, so I've got a game that uses foreboding and dread and atmosphere, whose mechanics reflect dwindling resources and scarcity.
Or mitigation of a hostile environment, or overwhelmingly hostile environment. You want to feel like the big atmosphere around you, or the big area that you're in, can and will kill you. To get that sort of active, I need to survive this thing, I need to make my way out of this horrific situation sort of thing.
Okay. I think that's a good leaping off point for our
Okay.
definition. We'll figure out exactly how to challenge it.
Okay.
For me, one of the things that I've been thinking about since I keep playing all those visual novels is that the horror aspect has to be linked to the failure state in the game. For
Okay.
me, what qualifies a visual novel as a game is the fact that you can lose. You can't
Okay.
lose at a book. If you read the book, you can't
You
win
won't.
or lose.
Okay.
You're just reading a book. In a visual novel, if you make the wrong choice, you die.
Okay.
And so for me, that's where the gameplay aspect comes in, is using the context clues in the story to try and figure out what the right choice is at any given junction.
Okay.
The failure state in a survival horror game, by contrast, has to be impacted. You should be afraid to die
Sure.
or to lose. You should be afraid of achieving the failure state.
Right.
And that was the next thing I was going to ask. Can you have a survival horror game where you don't die, or where a failure state isn't death?
Gotcha. Or like where death is suitably, the impact of death is suitably lessened, that it.
No, I mean like you should say, "Oh no, I lost because I am dead."
Okay.
You shouldn't say, "Oh no, I lost. I guess I'll walk 20 feet back."
Okay.
So what I'm getting
Can
at
you have
here,
a survival horror where you can't die?
Yeah.
Could something still be okay?
Is it still survival horror if you don't die?
Gotcha. I would think that you could still have a horrific situation that you can't die in, but maybe not a survival one where you can't.
So it's
die
still a
in.
horror game, but not necessarily a survival game.
Right.
So go ahead.
Like if you had a walking simulator with jump scares, that could certainly be considered.
Just say, for example, let's take Layers of Fear. I don't think you can lose Layers of Fear. There's enough puzzling in it that I would still say it qualifies as a game, because you can fail the puzzle and fail to make progress.
Sure.
And there's no puzzles in the
There's
books.
different endings depending on how you interact with the world and stuff.
So it's still a game.
Okay.
Is Layers of Fear a survival horror?
I would not say survival horror, because I don't think the elements of Layers of Fear that are scary are typically either psychological, in that how could this guy be going through this thing, and so you're trying to get to identify with this gross protagonist that you're playing as, or versus there's nothing in the environment that's just going to outright kill you.
Right. You don't get killed.
Right.
In Layers of Fear. I think if
you don't have to you don't have to. It's not like
you don't have to survive.
Right.
Okay. We haven't played, and we will on stream. Don't worry. Resident Evil 7. We're working through all of the Resident Evils. It's a whole
we
big
have
progress.
played Resident Evil 7, but not on stream.
Specifically, I'm talking about in Resident Evil 7 when they've got the locked room that you're trying to escape.
Okay.
We haven't played it, so some of this is going to be conjecture on our part.
Okay.
Yeah,
you're talking about the DLC, not the locked room where you've got like the birthday cake. And all that stuff.
That's hilarious, and I love that part of the game. But no, specifically the for those who haven't played it or seen it on YouTube like us,
right. Mama Maybell, or I don't remember her actual name.
Mama Zombie
locks you in a room.
Right.
Chains you to a bed, I think.
Something like, yeah.
And is like, I'm going to leave you here, think about what you've done, I don't know. And she leaves. And so your part then is to try and escape from that situation, both from your locks and then from the room eventually, but...
She makes the round, so she goes out and then she comes back and she makes sure that you're still tied up like she left you.
Right. So the actual meat and potatoes of that is gauging how much time you have before she comes back, and then making sure that the room, whenever she comes back to it, doesn't tip her off that you're like operating in it in any way other than being locked to a bed.
Right. So with specific regards to that, hypothetically speaking, if you escape and then Mama Zombie comes in and notices that you've escaped,
right?
Hypothetically, if that is the failure state and she takes you back to start, but taking you back to start just means throwing you back in the cage and she doesn't kill you, is it still a survival horror?
Okay.
Because maybe not for us, the player, but for the character who's trapped in the cage, this is very much a case of life and death.
I think if the implication is that you're going to die, it's probably still survival, because I think that gets into like in horror whether or not you show the kill or not.
Okay.
Because even if you don't show it, you know that it happened. Like this person may be locked there until they starve to death. I think that's still, you're trying to match wits against the situation that you're in and try to escape from it and to survive it in some way.
Okay,
so I don't know if you work that back to, I don't know, to a point where she doesn't kill you, but...
Is it fair then to say, to amend our definition, I guess we can try and like pop that up somewhere, but is it fair to say that a game that uses a sense of foreboding and dread and atmosphere, either on the player or the character, or both? Is that fair to amend it there to say that it's okay if, even though we, the player, know that we're not going to die as a result, as long as someone thinks they might die, it's still a survival horror?
Are you saying that... you playing a game know that you yourself are not going to die? Is that what you're trying to separate?
No, you playing the game, Jeff playing the game,
right,
knows that if the character in the box gets caught, she's not going to die. She thinks she's going to die,
Okay.
But you, Jeff, know that she's just going to get put back in the box.
Oh, okay. So if it's a horrific situation for them versus...
Yeah. They very much believe that they are surviving through this.
Okay. I would think so.
Okay. So it's okay if they're more scared than you are.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. I think ideally you'd want to try and put them in that... you, in this case, the game designer, would want to put your player in that situation so that they empathize with the person, or have a similar situation to that without actually putting them in harm.
Right, because if you put someone in a box and then kill them, if they get out, then they'll be dead.
Right.
That's
not
murder.
ideal. That's not good game design. That's just
that's murder. Yeah.
Don't murder people.
Okay. Then it's fair to say that Resident Evil 7, by and large, including the DLC where you're trapped in that box, even if they don't kill you, so survival.
I would think so.
Okay, cool. Because I agree.
Okay.
We can't qualify it in stated definition necessarily, but we do know it when we see it.
Right. It feels like survival horror.
Okay, so when Jeff and I had started this text versation, I had issued him the challenge is Crypt of the Necrodancer, which is a game we love. I love.
I really like that game as well. I just can't play it.
Yeah. It's hard.
I'm bad at it.
Is that a survival horror?
And the immediate answer was no, and then I tried to justify that.
And then it got murky, and then we were like, why don't we do this on television?
So Alex informs me, as I have not experienced most of that game, that the story is in fact spooky.
Yes.
Or would you define it as horrific?
So, in broad terms, without getting too terribly specific, there is a guy who gets a magic loot. And he's like, dope, a magic loot. I can live forever or whatever. Okay. And it turns him evil.
Sure.
So then he starts haunting the crypt. He is the Necrodancer, and this is his crypt. And it's kind of terrifying because, like, you go in, you play Cadence, you go in to rescue your dad, and you dive into the crypt to try and fish him out. And when you do, you feel your heart, like, moving to the beat of the place because it's enchanted. And everyone there, all the zombies, all of the skeletons, ghosts, your typical horror fanfare, are all moving to this twisted, horrible beat. Yeah, evil monkeys.
Evil monkeys.
What was the horror movie we saw last year?
With evil monkeys? Was it Bad Boon? Or was it something like that? No.
Yeah, it was
no.
something like that.
It was definitely... There was a horror movie involving a baboon that went
baboon.
bad.
Yeah.
I can't remember
Bad Boon.
I don't remember if it was Bad Boon.
It's probably not.
Was it just his name?
No, he had a name like Gary.
If you also
YouTube
watch this movie,
viewers,
please
let us know what
put
horrible...
it in the comments.
I'm getting a little bit
see
sidetracked.
But you're just saying that monkeys can in fact
monkeys
be
are scary.
Even though that movie's not a good episode.
No, that's not a good reflection.
Yeah.
I was telling Jeff that there's an element of item management, inventory management that would be present in a lot of survival horror games that you still get in Crypt of the Necrodancer, which satisfies the prerequisite that it has the sense of foreboding or dread, at least in the character. The character knows that they're going to die. It may not feel so scary to us, but they do.
Okay.
There's the inventory, there's the scarcity, because you've got scrolls, you've got food, everything's procure on site. If you don't have it in your pocket, then you can't eat a mutton or whatever.
Eat a mutton.
And Jeff was talking about specifically trying to figure out when you walk down the hallway if you want to get your herbs or your handgun ammo for Resident Evil. In this, you could be, and I have been, faced with the decision between a Scroll of Fireball, which is a one-time use that casts this huge fireball spell horizontally, which consumes the same inventory slot as a mutton, which would restore 4 hearts, which is huge. So I'm making that decision, which and on a time limit too, because magic or whatever is gonna drag me by my ankles to hell. I don't think it's a survival horror.
It's certainly
but
not
why
presented as such. Because, like... And maybe that gets into what you were talking about in terms of presentation for the player versus the protagonist. Because from their situation, going into this scary, awful crypt where you're probably going to die, or at least could die.
You do die a lot.
On the way to trying to reach your goal and then escape. then that could certainly be delivered as horrific. I don't know that it is within Crypt of the Necrodancer, because it always, I mean, like, it's always like vibrant and bouncing.
Yeah,
and
the
like,
music doesn't make you feel unnerved.
right.
Yeah,
and I don't know if that's. I'm hesitant to go into just that, just because like I think there are parts of like tongue-in-cheek horror.
Sure.
Where you call attention to the tropes that people are used to. And
but that's like subverting the trope.
Sure.
Yeah, that's like higher order.
And not what
parody,
they're doing
yeah.
in Crypt of the Necrodancer.
Right. And maybe they are, but that's not really the point.
So from that standpoint, it doesn't feel like horror. Whether or not a roguelike, or we're going into other genres, or elements of a roguelike could be overlapping with survival or survival games, that's also probably, it's a different set of, like, you can either argue it's not a survival horror because it's not horror, or it's not survival horror because it's not a survival game.
Okay.
And
okay, so you're saying that it satisfies the survival criteria because you're still making inventory decisions, everything's procure on site, you have to kill what you eat what you kill. Okay, so then...
Because, like, Metal Gear Solid 3 is a survival game.
Certainly, like stealth survival.
Right, but not
the horror. There's
even
a
elements,
ghost. Yeah,
there's elements of horror in the form of ghosts
but
and
I would
body
not
horror.
call it.
Yeah, it's not a survival horror game.
I guess because that's not the feeling that I get from it, from Metal Gear Solid 3.
Or even, like, the primary focus of it.
Yeah.
So I think Crypt of the Necrodancer, similarly, while it has elements that might be, like, subtle or lessened versions of survival, doesn't feel like a horror game.
Okay, then to amend our definition, is it fair then to say that the game has to use the foreboding and dread in the atmosphere to affect a combination of both the player and the character to give that sense of unnerve?
I think so. Or
because the story's spooky. It's kind of body horror and horror in Crypt of the Necrodancer, but I'm not afraid when I'm playing it.
Right.
I can get jump scared by turning a corner and suddenly getting instant killed by a boss, but I'm not afraid like I am in Resident Evil. If you watch our playthroughs, there's a lot of times when I walk into a room, a spider is there, and then I panic and then immediately turn around and leave.
We had a little bit of that today when we were playing Dino Crisis 3.
Yeah.
Got swooped by a raptor and
yeah, and I just left
ran out of that.
I didn't want that. Yeah,
that's part of surviving.
That's scary.
Escaping is part of surviving.
Okay, I'll go ahead and I'll try and say that they do that. A game that uses foreboding and dread in atmosphere to affect the player as well as the character.
Right. Yeah, because while your character is scared in Crypt of the Necrodancer, you yourself are typically not.
I'll say to affect the player through the character.
Sure.
Because while Cadence is spooked, you're not.
Right.
Okay.
I think that's fair.
Affect the player through the character.
What are other things where you... Because, like... Yeah, I think the item management may just be specific to...
Resident Evil?
Well, just specific to the survival portion of the... And, like, the survival is part of the horror in that situation. Like, you're trying to survive a horrific situation.
Okay. And it's not just the horrors that you're surviving, it's that you have to go through, like, getting from one horror to the next.
Right.
Okay.
You're in a terrible environment, and you have to live there for a certain amount of time until you can get out.
Okay.
Usually via rocket launcher and a helicopter.
Typically.
Or a Sea-Doo. We're going to play Resident Evil 4. I'm so excited.
About Resident Evil 4, because I want to touch on 3, but I can't because we haven't played it yet. But we will. Resident Evil 4, for me, was the point of divergence where Resident Evil stopped being a survival horror. I'm not saying that Resident Evil 4 wasn't a horror game. In fact, I would say that it probably was a survival horror. But 5 isn't.
Okay. I see. It's like the turning point.
Yeah.
And 4 is right there on the ragged edge of like
Right.
whether or not it's survival horror. Because you've still, for those unfamiliar, Resident Evil 4, you've got like an attaché case, and so you're constantly trying to figure out which items you're going to take along with you. And again, it's ammo, health, weapons, assorted tools, to get through where you need to get through. You've got a limited amount of space, and trying to juggle all of that while still interacting with a bunch of scary situations.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, 4 they really do play with tone a lot in terms of the horror and how it's presented, because like, and that might just be from a pacing standpoint,
cheek stuff,
so that,
or what do you think?
Because the guy that looks like Rasputin, Napoleon is not scary.
No, he's a zombie, which is
he's
scary
a zombie,
to me.
Yeah, he's a small zombie person who looks like he's wearing like a Napoleon costume. Mm-hmm. He's not particularly scary, and he's very like shrill. And up until the point that he turns into a big like pulsating monster,
he's not very scary at all. And when he's a giant monster, it's kind of scary. But
just because like
spookier.
It's a big scary thing that might eat
you.
you.
It's not like an abomination type.
Yeah. Like things, because like Contra has a lot of big horrible abomination things, but I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a horror game.
I don't think that's the primary focus with regards to Contra, because they're trying to show you how hard a game can be and how unfun it is.
Right.
And in Resident Evil, they're like, ooh, do you want to turn around that corner?
Right.
You might die.
But there's still large segments of 4 that are scary, legitimately.
Yeah. And
like presented as horror, because like, hey, there's a cabin. You've got to hole up in the cabin for a certain amount of time until this whole village of infected people stops attacking you. Mm-hmm. And so that's intense, because you've got a limited amount of resources, a limited amount of space, and it's constant. Like, your safe area in that is being constantly invaded by wave after wave of these awful things that go from either scary zombie-like people to like infected whip scorpion,
which is
bug
gross,
things, or people wielding chainsaws and running through the house and stuff. So that's all presented as scary in that, and you've still got the survival aspects. But yeah, 5, and I haven't played it firsthand, but I've seen most of that game firsthand, or secondhand, I guess. It's not my hand, it's the wrong controller. I can understand why you wouldn't be like, that's not scary.
It's not. I wasn't scared. I don't think Chris or Sheva were scared. They might have been caught off guard. But...
Yeah, that's an interesting thing too, because like Chris went from like Boy Scoutish character in 1 to who's essentially an action movie star in 5. Mm-hmm. And that's reflected both in terms of tone and in terms of physical appearance.
Because he does a lot of steroids between 1 and 5?
Yeah. That man has had some huge gains between that.
That's a lot of protein powder.
Right?
Yeah.
And Sheva's not, like, bulky, but she's physically fit and, like...
She's very capable.
Right.
Yeah. And from like a gameplay perspective, the biggest difference is, like, in Resident Evil 1, I had a lot of times where I was like, well, Jesus Christ, I don't know how I'm going to get from here to there and then shoot somebody, because I don't know that I'll have gun at that point.
And in 5, you just have gun.
Yeah, in 5, I literally had, throughout most of the game, so much ammunition, I didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, you don't necessarily need to pick up more just because
you're I would just leave it. And in Resident Evil 1, if I left ammo sitting on the ground, that was huge.
Right, that's a source of agitation and anxiety stemming from
that.
Whereas
that makes me scared, because like, oh, holy shit, I left the guns at home.
Deciding between whether or not you're going to shoot a bunch of zombies with acid rounds or fire rounds in 5 is less
That's
scary.
Not really a spooky choice.
Sure.
So then, with regards to our definition, is it fair to say that the survival element has to drive the horror? I should be afraid.
Specific to survival horror.
Specifically to survival horror, which is I keep pointing the wrong way because it's flipped. But yeah. Specifically to survival horror.
Yeah. I think the survival drives the horror of that. Because you could say that 5 is a horror game but it's probably not a survival horror. Is that what you're getting at?
I would barely call 5 a horror game, and if you wanted to call it a horror game, that's fine. I wouldn't be mad. And so, yeah, I guess you could call it an action horror, but it is not survival horror.
Right.
It is not... You don't experience the horror of Resident Evil, which is like their tagline. So I've got the game that uses foreboding and dread and atmosphere to affect the player through the character, whose mechanics reflect dwindling resources and scarcity to mitigate some of the hostility of an environment directly affecting.
So yeah, in 5 you still have hostile environment. You don't necessarily have dwindling resources. And I mean, you still are trying to survive in the sense that your character can die, but it's not
Your
nearly
character
as
can die in Tetris.
Right. It's not nearly as oppressive as Resident 1 feels to your character.
So
like, you don't feel as vulnerable as Resident Evil 5 Chris as you do as Resident Evil 1 Chris.
And I was thinking about that because, like, you were talking about how Encrypted the Necrodancer, I can get further than you can. I'm more adept at that game. I've got, like, 30 times the playtime, so it's not a big deal. No, I'm saying, if you play that game as much as me, I'm sure you'd be just as good. I could get much further in Crypt of the Necrodancer, and there are people who are much better at survival horror games that can speed through the Resident Evil anthology in the time that it would take me to beat 1. So I think that the difference is the game has to want you to feel vulnerable. It has to want you, in the mechanics of the situation, have to drive you into that feeling of vulnerability and helplessness. The other one that's not quite a walking simulator, but close, is Outlast.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
I haven't played enough of Amnesia. We should finish that sometime.
Okay.
But Outlast, you have no combat ability at all. That's the one.
You don't.
Yeah. You've got a camera.
I remember that one. Yeah. You've got a camera. You've got batteries force-head camera to drive your night vision.
And that's what drives the scarcity. That's the survival element, is that you could walk blind through a basement and then eventually find your way to the exit.
Right.
But that
you
would be
probably
horrible.
won't because there's a million guys in there that want you dead. And there are also like right angles in that. So just if you have a completely black space, it's hard to navigate.
Spooky. You don't know what's there.
Sure.
Okay, so Outlast then is for sure survival horror.
I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah, that feels like a survival horror. Even though the only item management you have there is...
Do I have batteries? Yes.
Do I have batteries?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a...
You have to manage when you're using the night vision.
Yeah.
So that's still inventory management. Why is Dino Crisis 2 not a survival horror? Is it because it fails in the survival check? Is it fair to call it an action horror? Is it a horror game?
In terms of tone, I'm trying to think of how... Since we've already sort of said that Resident Evil 5 is an action horror.
Yes. At best.
At best. 5 or 2.
Dino Crisis
2. 2. You certainly can die.
Yep.
There are elements of it that are presented as horrific. Specifically, like how dinosaurs eat people.
Yeah.
But there's enough...
You see a lot of corpses.
Yeah. And that's probably scarier than the actual... Like the
being attacked by a dinosaur, with very few exceptions, because like the scene with the Plesiosaurus or whatever it was underwater, scares the shit out of me still.
Right, because that's an actively hostile environment, right?
Yeah, because even
hard to move around
water,
in.
Yeah.
It's so it's hard for your character to navigate. There are fast and bulky enemies that will kill you.
Mosasaurus.
Yeah, so you always feel like you could die.
Oh yeah, and that's another thing. They used the camera angles in old Resident Evil, as well as Dino Crisis,
right,
to affect your vision, which is limiting a resource.
Right.
Your vision being a resource.
Yeah,
so.
that's that same way with Outlast.
Yeah,
in terms of
because they're limiting your vision. Yeah, that's good. I like that.
No, it's an interesting way to take that mechanic in a different direction. presented as a different thing.
But like specifically underwater, those things will sneak around a corner, and
Yeah.
you've got very little. Even the audio down there is sort of muted and wavy and
Yeah.
unsettling.
It feels like you're underwater for that, and so it's similarly like.
Because I wouldn't be able to fight much of anything underwater.
No, it sounds awful.
Yeah,
Even if
I
you've
would
got a
be
cool diving
floating
suit.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think like aspects like that are certainly presented as horrific. And like you said, there's a number of corpses and sort of like navigating a gross environment or
The
one that
environment is hostile towards you.
Sure.
Yeah.
But your ways that you survive that are primarily how much ammo you have.
Yeah, and you
And
can
it's not
just stop
necessarily-
by a computer and fill your gun up.
Right. It's
Yeah.
not particularly limiting in terms of how much offense you have in that game. And that's reflected in like the cutscenes and stuff in terms of like, oh, we shot a rocket launcher at this T-Rex. Now he's missing an eye, but he's back.
Yeah.
It's like
That's a lot of exclamation points and fewer ellipses.
Right.
You should have more ellipses than exclamation points, I think, as a general rule.
in your script.
Yeah.
If you're writing your horror thing. Yeah.
So compared to Dino Crisis 1, which is a survival horror,
I would say so, yes. Since it is basically
Resident
Resident
Evil
Evil with
with
dinosaurs, yeah.
compared to that one, there's a lot they abandoned completely. I didn't even know about the tranquilizer system and the weapon creation system in one.
in one.
Yeah, because you spend time in the inventory. You can make like anesthetic rounds that put the dinosaurs to sleep, or if you put enough of them together, I have the hiccups. If you put enough of them together, you can get like an instant kill. But that takes a bunch of resources that you're specifically not using to make your med packs bigger.
Right.
So that's scarcity of resources. That's the big driving survival thing. And there were a lot of situations in one where I was like trapped in a room, dinosaurs outside, dinosaurs in other rooms that I needed to be in,
Right.
and I couldn't figure out what I
best
was allowed
way.
to shoot.
Yeah.
Because I don't think, strictly speaking, I don't think you have to shoot much of anything in that game.
You can get around that most things by running in
Yeah,
that game.
and screaming.
And screaming, yeah. It's important
we did
to scare off the dinosaurs by screaming while you run. If you flail, that also helps, I find.
Yes.
Yeah. But velociraptors are fast, and so that is not an easy task if you just chose to have a pacifist Dino Crisis run.
At the end, I think you have to fire rockets at the
Yeah, you
T-Rex,
do, yeah.
but I don't think you kill it necessarily.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, but either way,
I think the explosion kills them.
yeah.
Those are bad.
Oh yeah, because you set the island to explode.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. I played that game.
It's a great game.
So yeah, okay.
So I'd say 2 is probably, like Resident Evil 5, that would be more of an action horror than survival horror.
Would you say the same for what we've experienced of Dino Crisis 3 as an action horror?
As such, yes.
Okay.
But with a sci-fi coat of paint.
Okay. So we're getting towards the end of our allotted time. So we'll go ahead, we'll reread what we've got for you. Or I'll try my best to translate what
You
I've
can read your
written.
handwriting, you're fine.
This isn't all in English.
Blood!
That would be survival horror.
Yeah.
But only if you guys
Turns
can
it
fail.
around to you guys.
Yeah. So I say, Jeff and I have worked together, and we have decided that a survival horror game specifically is a game that uses foreboding and dread in its atmosphere to affect the player. The end goal is to affect the player through affecting the character. The mechanics of the game have to reflect a dwindling resources in order to satisfy the survival criteria, and scarcity to mitigate some of the hostility of an environment that wants to kill you.
Right.
And this scarcity must directly drive some of the horror of the game. You can get by a lot on the atmosphere,
Right.
but you have to be worried that your decisions in how you're managing your ammo affect your ability to progress and scare you. Because
Right.
in Dino Crisis 2, I was never afraid.
Right.
In Dino Crisis 1 and in Resident Evil, I was consistently afraid because I didn't know if I had enough bullets to get to the next problem.
Right. Right. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Nice.
That was good. We did a good job.
team.
Hopefully, I've got the thing indicated over there now, and up somewhere. Damn
this
it!
way.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll do survival horror. We did the survival horror here. We're gonna play a bunch of survival horror games because it's October.
Woo! Shovel Knight's survival horror. You heard it here first.
Well, I mean, if we do like the Spectre Knight DLC or something, let's get ahead of ourselves. So if you guys have a genre of game that you want us to experience or get pedantic about, let us know. We'd love to debate.
It's always fun.
Yeah.
We just like talking about video games.
It's true. Stuff. We do it without you guys being here.
It's true.
We do it with you guys being here. Just let us know what you want from us, and we'll give you that. So if you found anything that we said to be completely wrong, or if you know any games that you feel definitively are survival horror games that don't fit the definition, let us know. Comment below, however YouTube orients things.
Comments down.
So thanks for coming with us on our inaugural episode. This has been When It's Convenient, When It's Pedantic.
Nice. Do-do-do.